Imagine waking up one morning in 2025 and realizing that the price of gold, that classic safe haven we all look to when the world feels shaky, has gone vertical. I mean, I'm talking about a jump from roughly 2,600 US dollars to over $4,300 per ounce in just a single year.
That's not just a price move. That's a scream.
It is. It's the kind of movement that usually signals, I don't know, the end of the world, or at least a total collapse of faith in paper money. It just screams global fragility.
It's the ultimate fear gauge. When gold does that, it means investors everywhere are panicked, they're betting against stability, and they're preparing for what the economic survey calls managed disorder.
Exactly. Chaos. And yet, and this is the paradox, this is what we need to unravel today. While the world was buying up gold and bracing for impact, three major credit rating agencies, Morningstar, DBRS, S&P, and R&I, they all looked at India and said, you know what, we're upgrading you.
Right, in the middle of all that fear.
They raised India's sovereign credit rating. Why? Because of one incredibly dry, boring, yet utterly powerful word: fiscal consolidation.
And that is exactly what we're here to discuss. It
Yeah.
sounds dry, but honestly, it's the difference between a country that collapses under pressure and one that actually thrives.
Yeah.
This isn't just about, numbers on a spreadsheet or some boring bureaucratic belt-tightening.
Yeah, it's more than that.
It's about a deliberate, a strategic shift in how a nation spends its money, moving from just paying the day-to-day bills to actually building assets that secure the future.
It's a massive topic, and we are going to tear it apart today. But first, a huge welcome to everyone listening. You are tuning in to Simplified UPSC by PPP. We are so glad to have you here with us.
Absolutely. We have a lot of ground to cover.
Before we dive into the heavy machinery of the economic survey, I do have a humble request. If you're finding value in these deep dives, please hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel.
It really does help the channel grow.
It does. And, if you're capable and you want to support the creation of this super useful content, consider joining the paid membership on YouTube. It really, it keeps the lights on and ensures we can keep bringing you these deep dives.
And we have to give a massive heartfelt shout out to our existing members. Thank you so much for your support. Please keep liking the videos and sharing your valuable comments.
Yeah.
We do read them, and they help us shape these discussions to be exactly what you need.
Oh, and a quick resource alert before we start. For everyone listening, free notes with practice previous year questions, or PYQs, as you know, are available right now on our Telegram channel. The link's in the description.
Definitely grab those.
But if you happen to be a legend YouTube member, check the Discord channel. We've got premium notes there with extra PYQs and, crucially, model mains answers waiting for you. So do join there if you can.
Those model answers are a game changer for mains prep, so definitely take advantage of them.
Okay, let's set the agenda. Our mission today is a full comprehensive analysis of Chapter 2 of the Economic Survey 2025-26. The title is Fiscal Developments, Anchoring Stability Through Credible Consolidation.
And we need to be clear, we are not just going to summarize this.
No way, we're going to perform surgery on it.
That's right, we're covering everything. The introduction, central finances, the complexities of state finances, the debt profile, and then the big picture of general government finances. We're going to analyze every detail and, most importantly, link it all back to the previous year questions that we have.
We have to show you why this matters for your exams and, frankly, for your understanding of the real world.
Let's do it.
So let's jump right in. Section 1, the global context and central government finances.
To really understand India's position, you have to look at the backdrop. The survey uses a very specific, somewhat haunting phrase to describe the global environment right now: managed disorder.
Managed disorder. That sounds ominous. It sounds like we're just barely keeping a lid on a pot that's about to boil over.
It is. I mean, think about it. The world is facing elevated debt levels, geopolitical tensions everywhere, and economic fragmentation. Most developed countries, they're struggling to rein in the massive spending they unleashed during the pandemic.
They're stuck.
They're stuck in a cycle of high debt and slow growth. But India's fiscal trajectory is standing out precisely because it's moving in the opposite direction. We're on what the survey calls a medium-term glide path.
I like that image, a glide path. It implies a controlled landing rather than, a crash. I remember back in the union budget for FY22, the government set this target, right, to bring the fiscal deficit below 4.5% by FY26.
And looking at the data, they're not just on track, they're actually ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
The fiscal deficit dropped from a massive 9.2% of GDP in FY21. And we have to remember, that was the pandemic peak when the government had to spend whatever it took to keep people alive.
Unprecedented times.
And down to 4.8% in FY25, according to the provisional accounts. And the budgeted target for FY26 is 4.4%.
Which is below that 4.5% target. They're going to hit it a year early. But here's where it gets interesting for me. It's not just the fiscal deficit, it's the primary deficit. I really want to make sure everyone understands the distinction because the survey makes a huge deal about it.
It's a crucial, crucial distinction. The fiscal deficit is, simply put, the total amount the government needs to borrow to balance its books. It includes everything. But the primary deficit is the fiscal deficit minus the interest payments on previous loans.
So it basically removes the burden of the past sins, all that old debt, and just looks at the government's current behavior.
Exactly, it's the key question. If we didn't have this mountain of old debt to service, would we still be overspending today? When the primary deficit declines, it means that the new money you're borrowing is increasingly being used to pay off past interest rather than funding your current day-to-day consumption.
So we're borrowing less for today's groceries and mostly just servicing the old credit card debt? That's a sign of structural health?
It's a fundamental sign of improving fiscal health. It shows you aren't living as far beyond your means as you were before.
You know, this whole conversation about targets and deficits, it connects directly to a crucial concept in public administration and economics, which brings us to our first previous year question linkage.
Ah, yes, the big one, the FRBM Act.
This is the one from 2013, right?
Yes. Let's look at question 2 from the 2013 General Studies Paper 3. The question asked, what were the reasons for the introduction of the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management, FRBM Act, 2003? Discuss critically its salient features and their effectiveness.
Okay, that's a classic question. But 2013 was a long time ago. How does this new economics survey from 2025-26 even relate to that?
Well, it's about the evolution of the idea. The original FRBM Act was all about setting rigid, hard-coded targets like the fiscal deficit must be 3% by the specific year, no exceptions.
Right, it was very strict.
Very. But the survey, specifically in box 2.8, argues for a completely different, more mature approach. It argues for a debt-to-GDP anchor of 50% by FY31, rather than immediately reinstating those rigid annual FRBM targets.
So, because the world is too volatile now for those kinds of rigid rules.
Exactly. The survey's argument is that in a world of managed disorder, you need flexibility. If you have a rigid law that says you cannot borrow more than X, but then a global pandemic hits or a war starts, you're stuck.
You either break the law or you let the economy collapse.
You've nailed it. The effectiveness part of that 2013 question is being reimagined today. The new definition of effectiveness comes from a credible glide path, showing the market you are consistently moving in the right direction over time, rather than a strict law that you might have to break anyway.
That's a really nuanced take. It's like the government is saying, trust our trajectory, trust our commitment, rather than trust this specific number we wrote down in a law 10 years ago.
And the markets are buying it. That's why the credit ratings went up. They see the intent, they see the capability, and they see the results.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's look at the other side of the balance sheet, the income side. You can't fix a deficit just by cutting spending. You have to earn more. How is the government making all this money?
Well, revenue resilience has been the unsung hero of this entire story. Revenue receipts rose from 8.5% of GDP before the pandemic to 9.1% after the pandemic. Now, that might sound like a small percentage increase, just 0.6%.
But on an economy our size, that's huge.
It's a colossal amount of money.
Yeah.
On a $4 trillion economy, that's billions and billions of extra revenue every year.
And it's coming from direct taxes, right? Personal income tax and corporate tax seem to be booming.
They are. We're seeing a surge. Part of it is that corporate profitability is up, which obviously means more tax collected. But the other, more sustainable part is that compliance is getting better.
Ah, so technology is making it harder to hide income.
Much harder. The survey mentions that the buoyancy of direct taxes is greater than 1.
Okay, wait. Tax buoyancy. Let's break that down. What does that actually mean?
It's a simple but powerful concept. If tax buoyancy is exactly 1, it means for every 1% the economy grows, tax collections also grow by 1%. If it's greater than 1, like it is now, it means tax collection is growing faster than the economy itself.
So our tax system is becoming more efficient. We're capturing a larger share of the economic pie as it grows.
Precisely. And speaking of taxes, the survey mentions the Income Tax Act 2025, which is slated for 2026-27. It's all focused on simplification. But, the real heavy lifter on the revenue side seems to be on the indirect tax front, GST.
Of course, GST collections are they're hitting all-time highs every few months, it seems.
They are, and the most important indicator here is that GST growth is tracking nominal GDP growth almost perfectly. That means as the economy grows, tax collection grows with it. It shows the system is efficient and stable.
And the survey points to things like e-way bill volumes as an indicator of robust momentum. That's basically a real-time tracker of goods moving across the country, right?
Yeah, correct. It's a high-frequency indicator that tells you the economy is humming. And, this brings us to another PYQ linkage.
Let me guess. The one about the rationale for GST.
You got it. Question 10 from the 2013 GS paper 3rd asks for the rationale for introducing GST.
And here we are, over a decade later, seeing that rationale play out in real time.
We are. The rationale was to reduce compliance costs, remove cascading taxes, that's the awful tax-on-tax problem, and, most importantly, formalize the economy. This survey validates that entire premise by showing how GST has stabilized revenue and reduced the friction of doing business. The fact that revenue is stable and growing proves that the formalization part of the rationale actually worked.
Okay, taxes are great, revenue is strong, that's fantastic. But here's where it gets really interesting for me. The tax stuff is kind of expected, but the real surprise, the thing that honestly made my jaw drop when I read it, was the non-tax revenue.
Ah, yes.
Specifically, that dividend check from the Reserve Bank of India.
It is a staggering figure. The RBI surplus transfer for FY26 is 2.68 lakh crore.
2.68 lakh H crore. That's just a huge amount of money. It's essentially free money for the government.
It is historic. There's no other word for it. Overall, dividends and profits from the RBI and PSUs are up 70% annually in the last 2 years. This isn't just luck. It reflects the solid financial position of the central bank and the banking sector as a whole.
Can you explain that a bit more? Why did the RBI have so much extra cash to give away?
Well, the RBI earns interest on its assets like foreign bonds it holds in its forex reserves and domestic government bonds. When its earnings are much higher than its expenses, the surplus is transferred to the government. This massive surplus was likely due to profits from its foreign exchange operations and higher interest earnings. It's a sign of very prudent management of the country's balance sheet.
And it's not just the RBI. The public sector enterprises, the CPSEs, they're killing it too. The survey says net profits per CPSE went up by 174% between FY20 and FY25.
Which completely challenges that old, tired narrative that public sector units are always inefficient money pits. They are becoming efficient, they're profitable, and they're contributing heavily to the national exchequer.
So just to recap the income side. The government is earning more from an efficient tax system. It's getting a massive windfall from dividends. And all of this means it's borrowing less. That sounds like a winning formula. But the next big question is, how are they spending it?
And that is the crucial pivot. Right. It is not just about how much you spend, it's about the quality of that spending. Yes. We are seeing a definitive, undeniable shift from revenue expenditure to capital expenditure.
Capex, that's the buzzword of the decade in Indian economics, isn't it?
It should be. Revenue expenditure is basically maintenance. It's salaries, pensions, interest payments, subsidies. It's necessary, you have to do it, but it doesn't build the future. It's consumption.
Right.
Capital expenditure, Capex.
Yeah.
It's building roads, railways, defense infrastructure, ports, digital infrastructure. It creates assets that generate economic growth for years, decades to come.
The data is pretty stark. Revenue expenditure is down from 13.6% of GDP in FY22 to 10.9% in FY25. Meanwhile, Capex is way up.
And the survey introduces a term that we need to clarify for the listeners. Effective Capex. It reached 4.0% of GDP in FY25.
Wait, okay, unpack effective Capex. How is that different from normal Capex?
It's an accounting distinction, but it has a massive real-world impact. Capex, in the main budget document, usually refers to assets created by the central government directly.
Like a national highway.
Exactly. But the center also gives huge grants to state governments, specifically to build assets. In the traditional accounts, that just looks like a grant, which is usually classified as revenue expenditure. But because that money is being used to build a bridge or a school in a state, the survey counts it as effective Capex. It captures the full, true picture of asset creation happening across the country, funded by the center.
Ah, I see. So if the center gives money to, say, Uttar Pradesh to build an expressway, that counts towards this effective Capex number, even if it's technically a grant.
Precisely. It's a more honest way of looking at it.
And where's this money going?
Well, the big three are roads, railways, and defense. They take the bulk of it. But look at the growth in transfers to states for Capex. They grew by 34.9% in FY25 provisional accounts. That is a massive injection of funds into state-level infrastructure.
And it seems to be accelerating. The survey notes a rebound in FY26. It says Capex rose by 28% year on year in just the first 8 months, from April to November 2025. That is a lot of concrete being poured and a lot of steel going up right now.
It is. It's a conscious policy choice. But to fund this, you have to create space. You have to cut somewhere else. You cannot just print money. This brings us to subsidy rationalization.
This is always a politically sensitive topic, the classic guns versus butter debate, but in this case, it's roads versus subsidies.
It is, but the numbers are clear. Major subsidies, that's food, fertilizer, and fuel, declined from 1.9% of GDP in FY22 down to 1.2% in FY25.
That is a very significant drop. How does this link back to our exams, to the PYQs?
Well, let's look at question 5 from that same 2013 GS Paper 3. It asked about agricultural subsidies and distortions. And it specifically asks you to critically analyze the subsidy regime.
And the 2025 survey is essentially providing that critical analysis right now on a platter.
Exactly. The survey argues that rationalizing these subsidies creates the fiscal space needed for Capex. It's a direct trade-off. It argues that if you spend too much on subsidies that might be distorting the market, like, say, fertilizer subsidies that encourage overuse of urea,
Right.
then you don't have the money to build the irrigation systems, the cold storage, or the rural roads that farmers actually need for long-term prosperity.
But the survey is also very careful to note that despite this rationalization, the food security safety net hasn't been abandoned. We still have 78.9 crore beneficiaries receiving support under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana.
That's a critical nuance. Rationalization doesn't mean elimination. It means targeting. It means being more efficient so you can afford to do both. Feed the vulnerable in the short term and build the infrastructure for the future.
So putting it all together, the central government seems to have its house in pretty good order. Deficits are down, revenue is flowing, the quality of spending is up with Capex. But as you said, we're a federal country. The center is only half the story.
And this brings us to Section 3, State Government Finances, or, as one might call it, the weak link.
Ooh, is it really that bad?
It's a mixed bag, but there are definitely red flags popping up that the survey is pointing to. First, let's just look at the flow of money. Total transfers from the center to the states have literally doubled from FY20 to FY26. They've gone from 11.5 lakh crore to 25.6 lakh crore.
Doubled. In 6 years. That is a lot of cash flowing downwards to the states.
It is. This includes the 15 Finance Commission grants, things like revenue deficit grants for states that need them, money for local bodies, for health sectors, for disaster management. It's huge devolution of funds.
And this connects perfectly to a more recent question, question 14 from the 2025 GS Paper 2.
Yes, that question was all about center-state financial relations and fiscal federalism. If you're answering that question today, you have to mention this doubling of transfers. It shows that the center is financially empowering the states, but it also highlights the central tension. The center is giving more money, but it is also asking for more discipline in return.
And the biggest tool for enforcing that discipline, or maybe the biggest carrot to encourage it, is something called SASCI.
The Scheme for Special Assistance to States for Capital Investment, SASCIT.
I do love these government acronyms, so break down SASCI for us.
It is a game changer in fiscal federalism. The Fed basically said to the states, look, we will give you 50-year interest-free loans. This is free money, essentially, for half a century. But there's one condition. You have to use it for capital investment.
50 years, interest-free. That's not even a loan, that's virtually a grant. I mean, inflation alone would eat up the entire principal value by the time you're supposed to pay it back.
In real economic terms, yes, it's very close to a grant. The allocation was raised to 1.5 lakh crore in FY26. And here's the kicker, the real analysis part. The survey shows that without SASCI, state Capex would have actually declined.
Wow. Really?
Yes. The data shows state Capex would have dropped from 2.11% of their GSDP to 1.92% if not for this scheme pushing them.
So the center is basically propping up state infrastructure spending. It's using this free money to force their hand.
Correct. The center is nudging or maybe shoving the states to build assets because left to their own devices, many states are slipping.
So this raises the million-dollar question. What are the states spending their own money on if it's not infrastructure?
Well, this is the red flag. While the center is consolidating, the consolidated state fiscal deficit actually edged up to 3.2% of GSDP. And the survey points to a very specific culprit, which it discusses in detail in Box 2.7. Unconditional cash transfers, or UCTs.
Ah, the freebies debate. This is always controversial.
It is. The survey tries to be very objective. It just calls them UCTs. But the analysis is sharp. Spending on these various cash transfer schemes is estimated at approximately 1.7 lakh crore for FY26. That is a huge, huge chunk of state budgets.
And the central argument is that this money crowds out other, more productive spending.
Yes. The survey argues these transfers create what it calls expenditure rigidity. Once you start giving cash to people, it's politically almost impossible to stop. It becomes a permanent line item in your budget.
A committed liability.
Exactly. And if you have a limited budget, that money has to come from somewhere. The survey implies that usually it comes from cutting spending on schools, on hospitals, on roads, the very things that actually boost long-term growth and create jobs.
So it creates this terrible trade-off. Short-term income support, which is politically popular, versus long-term asset creation, which is economically essential.
You've summarized the dilemma perfectly. And the data bears this out. The survey notes that 18 states saw a deterioration in their revenue balances. They're borrowing money not to build assets, but to give away as cash. That's a dangerous spiral.
And this links back to the broad theme of fiscal prudence we saw in those PYQs. It is the exact opposite of what the FRBM Act was trying to achieve at the central level.
It is, and it's a classic conflict in a democracy.
Yeah.
Populism versus prudence. The survey, while trying to be impartial, is clearly siding with prudence here, is waving a big yellow flag, warning that this trend at the state level could destabilize the broader national economy.
So we have this divergence. The center is tightening its belt, and the states are, in many cases, loosening theirs. That must create a really complex debt picture. Let's move to Section 4, the debt profile and management. How bad is the overall debt burden?
It's heavy, there's no denying that. But the story here is that it's being managed very, very carefully. The center has a three-pillar strategy. Keep the cost low, mitigate risk, and develop the market for government bonds.
Okay, risk mitigation. That sounds like something out of an insurance company's playbook. What does it mean for government debt?
In a way, it is insurance. The government is mitigating the risk of having to pay back a huge chunk of its debt all at once. The key metric they look at is the weighted average maturity, or WAM.
The WAM. What is it for India right now?
It's high, which is good. It's 19.14 years.
19 years. So on average, the government has more than 19 years to pay back its loans.
That's right. And that is exceptionally healthy for an emerging economy. It dramatically reduces what's called rollover risk.
Rollover risk.
Imagine if you had a massive mortgage and the bank called you and said, you have to pay the whole thing off next year. You'd panic. You'd default. But if the bank says you have 20 years to pay it off in small installments, you can manage the payments. The government's doing the same thing, stretching out its debt over a very long period.
That makes perfect sense. The data says only 27% of the central government's debt matures in the next 5 years. So the immediate pressure is quite low.
Exactly. And then there's the other big risk, external debt. This is often the killer for emerging economies when they borrow in U.S. dollars. When the dollar gets strong, like we saw with those gold prices rising, countries with a lot of dollar debt get crushed. Their debt burden explodes overnight.
We saw this in the Asian financial crisis in the 90s and more recently in places like Sri Lanka. But the survey says India is insulated from this.
Very much so. India's external debt is only 2.6% of GDP. It's tiny. And most of that is owed to multilateral agencies like the World Bank on very soft long-term terms. The vast, vast majority of India's debt is in rupees, and it's held by domestic banks, insurance companies, and pension funds.
So we basically owe the money to ourselves.
In a sense, yes. It's a huge safety net. It means a currency fluctuation can't trigger a debt crisis for us.
That is a huge point of stability. But what about the states? You mentioned they are borrowing more and more.
And this is a major point of concern in the survey. State debt is rising. But the survey points out a fascinating and worrying market failure here. The markets, the institutions lending money to the states, don't seem to differentiate enough between a fiscally sound state and a fiscally reckless one.
You mean a state that's investing in Capex and a state that's borrowing for cash transfers are paying more or less the same interest rate on their loans?
Pretty much. The borrowing costs of the spreads on their bonds are very similar. And this is bad because it removes the incentive for a state to be responsible. If the market doesn't punish you for bad behavior with higher interest rates, why would you stop?
There's no market discipline.
None. The survey argues that we desperately need better data disclosure and more transparency from states so that the market can start penalizing bad fiscal behavior and rewarding good behavior.
That would force some discipline, for sure. If a state finance minister knows his borrowing costs will spike if he announces a massive new cash transfer scheme without a funding source, he might think twice.
That's the idea. It's about letting the market act as a referee.
So we've looked at the center, we've looked at the states, and we've looked at the debt. Now, let's zoom out to the widest possible lens. Section 5, General Government Finances. This is the center and the states all added together. What's the consolidated picture?
And this is where, despite the concerns about the states, when you look at the general government picture, India is actually a success story compared to the rest of the world.
Really? Even with the state-level issues dragging the numbers down?
Yes. Since 2020, the peak of the pandemic crisis, India has reduced its general government debt by 7.1 percentage points of GDP. Now compare that to our global peers. In the same period, the debt of the US, France, China, Brazil, it has either risen or stayed flat. We are one of the only large economies in the world that is actively deleveraging.
That is an impressive statistic. 7.1 percentage points is a lot of debt to shed in just a few years.
And we did it without sacrificing growth. In fact, while we were cutting debt, we were the fastest growing major economy. That's the key. It's growth-friendly consolidation.
Now, I want to get a little technical for a minute because the survey has this fascinating box 2.9. It asks the ultimate question. Is our debt sustainable? Can we actually afford this? And it uses some pretty fancy math to answer it.
Ah, yes. The fiscal response function.
It sounds like a title from a Big Bang Theory episode. The fiscal response function. Can you break that down for us in simple terms?
I'll try. It comes from a famous economics paper by a guy named Bond in 1998. It's basically a statistical test. It looks at a country's history and asks a simple question. When the government's debt goes up, what does the government typically do next?
Does it panic and keep spending, making things worse, or does it see the warning sign and start to tighten its belt?
Exactly. Does it improve its primary balance in response to rising debt? The statistical analysis in box 2.9 looks at decades of Indian data, and it proves that, historically, when debt rises, the Indian government tightens its belt. It reacts responsibly.
So because we have a proven track record of fixing things when they start to get bad, the model concludes that our debt is sustainable.
Precisely. The statistical test confirms a positive and significant relationship between debt levels and corrective action. It's data-driven proof of institutional maturity. It shows that, as a system, we don't just let debt spiral out of control, we respond to it.
That's actually very reassuring. It's like having a friend who sometimes runs up a big credit card bill, but then you know for a fact that they'll immediately pick up extra shifts at work to pay it off. You trust that friend more than someone who just keeps swiping the card.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The survey adds one more point to this sustainability argument. Public investment efficiency in India is very high. We get a lot of bang for our buck.
What does that mean?
It means the assets we build with our Capex generate a high return for the economy. The survey notes that about 4% of GDP investment comes from government revenue, which is a much higher rate of conversion than OECD countries had at similar stages of their development.
So we're not just paying off debt, we're also investing very efficiently, a double positive. We're coming to the end of our deep dive into Chapter 2. This has been a lot. Let's try to summarize the outlook. The survey calls the entire strategy credible consolidation.
That's the mantra. 2 words. The consolidation has to be credible, meaning the world has to believe you'll stick to it, and the goal is crystal clear. A debt-to-GDP ratio for the general government of 50% by FY31.
That's the anchor, 50% by 2031.
It's an ambitious, but, based on the current trajectory, an achievable target. And the drivers for this will be the reforms we've already discussed. GST 2.0, making the system even more efficient and simpler, and the new direct tax code. The message the survey is sending to the world is this. Fiscal discipline isn't just about saving pennies. It's about lowering the cost of borrowing for everyone in the economy.
Right. If the government can borrow more cheaply because it's seen as responsible,
then there's more capital available for the private sector to borrow, and at lower interest rates, which fuels private investment, job creation, and a virtuous cycle of growth.
And this leads me to my final provocative thought for our listeners today. We talked about how some state governments are spending a lot of money on cash transfers and running up deficits. And I think we tend to look at that and think, oh, that's just politics. It's happening in another state. It doesn't affect me.
But it's deeply personal.
It is. The survey explicitly links state-level fiscal indiscipline to the sovereign's borrowing cost. And the sovereign's borrowing cost, the interest rate the government of India pays on its bonds, sets the benchmark for every other interest rate in the economy.
If the government pays more to borrow, you pay more to borrow. It's that simple.
Exactly. So my question for you to think about is this. If a state on the other side of the country overspends, does it make your home loan more expensive? Does it increase the EMI on your car? The survey suggests the answer is a resounding yes. Your monthly budget might be tighter because of fiscal choices made in state capitals hundreds of miles away.
It is the hidden tax of fiscal irresponsibility. It doesn't show up on your payslip, but it hits your monthly budget through higher interest rates.
Something to mull over the next time you hear about a new freebie scheme. Is it really free?
Rarely, if ever.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into Chapter 2. It was a dense one, but man, was it important. We've covered central finances, the challenges at the state level, debt sustainability, and linked it all back to those crucial PYQs.
Absolutely vital for understanding the economic backbone of the country and, of course, for nailing those general studies papers.
Once again, a very humble request from our side. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP. We're trying to build something really great here, a resource that truly simplifies these complex topics for you.
And if you're in a position to, please consider joining the paid membership on YouTube. It supports us directly and helps us keep the quality of these deep dives as high as possible.
To all our existing members, thank you, thank you, thank you for the likes, the comments, the support. You guys are the best. Please keep sharing your feedback. It means the world to us.
And don't forget the notes. Free notes with practice PYQs are on our Telegram channel.
And for our legend YouTube members, those premium notes with the model mains answers are waiting for you right now on the Discord channel. Please do join there.
We'll see you there.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Goodbye, everyone.